Hey everyone, how's it going? Cell here. With the Crucible patch, they introduced a handful of new uniques, and I wanted to make a video talking about what I consider the most exciting one for me, based on its power level and how common it seems to be. So let's get into it. The Fourth Vow Unique Devout Chainmail, makes your armor also apply to chaos damage taken from hits. So we've seen a similar thing in the past against elemental damage from things like Transcendence, and Juggernaut makes 8% of armor apply to elemental damage. And now we have a new mastery that does a similar thing for chaos, applying 10% of armor to chaos damage from hits. And now we have this body armor introduced in the same patch as that mastery, making all of your armor apply to chaos damage taken from hits. This is pretty obscene, and has great synergy with another item. And that would be a Glorious Vanity with things people sacrificed in the name of Zibaqua, if that's how you pronounce that, for Divine Flesh Keystone, making 50% of your elemental damage taken as chaos damage. And then your armor applies to that chaos damage with the +5 max chaos res as well. Pretty solid recipe for armor scaling all of your hit-based defenses. Couple of downsides about this combination is, well, first of all, the item itself has an explicit downside, so to speak, of physical damage taken bypasses energy shield. You probably don't care about this. If you're going for like a CI type situation, then you're probably not going to use this armor anyways. You're going for like a Transcendence setup, most likely, using something like a Lore Weave. And apart from that, it has no life, which could be good because there's a new mastery for 15% increased life if your armor doesn't have a life mod, but this one does regenerate 3% of life per second. So that's one potential downside. It does come with some chaos res. Has pretty decent armor actually, especially for Jug. If you get up to this, 1k plus range, and then you're receiving double of that because of the Jug Ascendancy node, that's nothing to scoff at, and certainly workable given how powerful the core mod here is itself. Then the other cost, of course, is the opportunity cost of having to use a specific body armor and a specific keystone and devote passives to picking up a jewel slot and then allocating that keystone. And because of how Glorious Vanity works, it's going to corrupt all of the passives within its radius, so you might have to find a spot to fit that in your build based on whether or not you need certain nodes that are going to go around that jewel slot. And as mentioned, this unique seems pretty common. This is day 4 of the league coming up on, the end of, anyways. Kind of. It's weird with how the league time starts, but anyways, there are 1,103 of them on trade right now. This includes some offline people, but they all seem to be priced fairly cheaply. We can get into the 1 chaos range here, and there are quite a number of 1 chaos listings over the last few days, last few minutes, etc. So it seems like you'll be able to reasonably grab one of these for cheap, even if the demand goes up by quite a bit, because they seem common enough. People haven't even gotten to their endgame farming setups yet, so once they are and they're generating more uniques overall, this will definitely become more of a thing in terms of supply. So all in all, very solid item. Hoping to get this in solo self-found myself. And let's hop into Path of Building to see what kind of defensive benefit this can actually net you. Alright, just as a quick demonstration of things, don't take any of the hard numbers here too seriously, or the tree or anything like that. This is just my solo self-found Bone Shatter character I've been posting videos about. This is mostly just to showcase how well the Jug armor node and the Divine Flesh Fourth Vow interaction can make you tankier, I guess. So keep in mind these numbers on the left do not include spell suppression, because POB does not calculate your max hit on partial spell suppression. So if I remove all of these nodes, you'll see that my Cold and Lightning max hit are still about 40k, even though I lost a bunch of suppression, take away all of it, and the difference is made by these armor nodes here. So just look at the numbers in terms of the relativity, which I'll go into. Then in configuration, looking at just capping off my Chaos Res, and 100% of armor also applies to chaos damage taken from hits, because the armor itself is not yet in Path of Building, so this is a way to cheese that. And we can see that my chaos damage max hit will adjust if I switch this over to the value of the mastery passive. So default of 36k, 10% makes that about 39k, 100% takes that to 55k. So the benefit is huge. And then looking at this, what will most likely happen in my build, let's say, is I'll drop these extra resistance nodes to be able to pick up the jewel slot with the Glorious Vanity and Divine Flesh. So, again, checking this out with these nodes, same number of passives, looking at a 40k Cold and Lightning max hit. If I take this out, put in the Glorious Vanity, allocate Divine Flesh, up to 54k max hit. That's about a 35% higher max hit. It'll show a little bit higher here because it doesn't account for the fact that we dropped max res to get to this point. But that is a huge difference. Remembering that spell suppression is 50%, but only if you're capped, and only against spell damage. This will apply to attacks and spells, as long as they're hits, of course. That's the negative, but spell suppression also only applies to hits. So kind of a moot point when discussing the differences. And spell suppression is much more difficult to scale. There are only a few ways to get a higher percentage of damage being suppressed or mitigated by the suppression, whereas armor is maybe not easier to scale, but more possible to scale. So if you want to invest more into armor and possibly even drop some life, because getting more armor increases your max hit to the point that the life isn't as relevant, then you could do that. It's harder to do something like that with spell suppression. And the reason this happens like this is because the splitting, what's the term for it? Shifting of damage is the term they use. You are shifting 50% of the elemental damage you take into chaos damage. That happens before mitigation, if you're unaware. So if you have 50 Ele Res, 50 chaos, you're still taking 50% damage overall. You're not taking 75 because it runs through the 50% mitigation twice. You're just making yourself take a different type of damage. And this is good for two reasons, especially on a Juggernaut. One, if you have higher chaos res than elemental res, this functions as an increase to your max Ele Res equal to half the difference. So right now I have 2 higher chaos res than fire res. That means this node is effectively +1 fire res, max fire res. And 2, splitting the damage increases the effectiveness of your armor, because armor is more effective against smaller hits. And the way it's calculated, if you take a hit of 100 and half of that is fire damage, half of that goes to chaos damage, then your armor is being applied to those hits individually rather than collectively before the shifting. So basically, by splitting your damage into multiple types, your armor becomes more effective, equals more damage reduction. And we can see here that the Jug notable is still a sizable difference, but it's up to you whether or not that's a big enough difference. Looks like about 13% based on my numbers here. But it is absolutely possible to use this whole setup on another Ascendancy and get a similar defensive scaling as Juggernaut has. So that's about it as far as that interaction. I would highly recommend checking it out if you're on trade and like the tankier setup. You might not like going full glass cannon, but if you like playing this game to be tanky and dislike dying and want to try out the new defensive setup, I would highly recommend this. I am hoping to get one in solo stuff on myself and make another video about it in the future. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful or interesting, feel free to give it a like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.